Hey all, Steve from GuitarNiche here. So we're going to replace the nut on this Gibson Les Paul standard 60th, and this is what came out. Now I just assumed that this was Korean, or could have been micarta. I did a little research and it turns out it's probably Tusk, and I think it and the reason I say that is because, well, it's in the specs for the actual instrument, but, the specs can change over time. But what really made, what sealed the deal for me anyway was this. It goes ping. And I, just putting it on my workbench here, and I was going, oh, yeah, that's Tusk. It just, what fooled me here is that this is a little bit harder material than I'm used to seeing on most instruments. Then again, there's Tusk or graphite knockoffs and stuff, and Tusk as a brand name is a different type of material compared to normal graphite nuts and things like that. Now, just to carry on with where we're going to put in a bone nut. The owner and I talked about it. I said, "You're okay with bone?" He says, "Yeah, it's fine," because we knew that this was going to come out. But and this is the blank that we'll work with. But just as an aside, as we're here, as a comparison, here's a graphite blank that I pulled out from my treasures. And you can hear that's got the ping, right? Here's this one came off an Epiphone. Very common issue with Epiphones here. Yeah, I don't know if it's still as bad as it used to be, but man, we had a lot of them coming in with the low E side fractured off because they were not molded wide enough for heavier strings. So the string acts as a wedge and just goes snap. See you, bye-bye. Anyway, this is a harder plastic. Still has a little bit of a ping versus a softer plastic. That's got like nothing going on. And here's a bone blank for relative size. This one I'm not using because it's discolored. It's rather dead. And the blank I intend to use, good quality. Got actually a pretty decent sound to it if you subscribe to these sorts of things. Anyway, the reason I'm going on about this at length is because this is the nut is a very essential and critical part of any guitar because it is a focal point or a node, if you would, for string energy, especially when you're playing open. You can argue that, well, a fretted note doesn't take this into consideration. I totally disagree with that because the strings are still held in place and the energy is still passing through this filter, which is what it is. It is a filter. So the type of material and how well it's installed, it has to be married to its seat as precisely as possible in order to get as much energy from the strings into the instrument, which enhances or gives your tone as much of a chance to survive as possible, if I could put it like that. Okay, so on to the show. First order of business will be thinning the new blank down to the dimensions. That is, as we can see here, this particular unit is 3/16 wide. Or wide, thick, I guess, by 1 11/16 long, to use that dimension, okay? And I'll be back and forth with this many times to make sure that this fits in the slot perfectly. But before all that, we still have to true up the slot. There's some glue residue which I'm going to have to clean up, and that shouldn't be too much of a big deal. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of an adventure. Okay, it's going to get a little detailed. I hope you will carry along because I'll express some of my insights, you might say, as to why I do things the way I do. The end result should be cosmetically appealing and functionally doing what it's supposed to do. Okay, so I have my tools of choice. Nice 1/4-inch chisel with a nice sharp edge on it. Triangle file. This is great for getting into sharpening up the corners, inner corners. A small fine file and a roughly just under 3/16 inch single cut large file. This really helps with cleaning out the bed, let's say, and just getting everything really nicely prepared after we have the excess glue taken out. Okay, so just scrape that away. This is going to be a bit of a process. I might use another tool for this. You really got to be super careful, because if you knock that if this is, see, an older instrument, and you knock that binding, it'll separate, and because they tend to shrink back, that's no fun having to deal with that. So I'm going to got another tool here, which is 1/4-inch rat tail file, but I sharpen the other end to make a nice little chisel for exactly this purpose, because it gets nice and tight into these areas. Come on, Bubby. There we go. And we just nibble, nibble, nibble. At some point, you may not be able to see if there's any significant glue left. I'm trying to walk and chew bubble gum here. So I'm not trying to get all of the glue off per se, because I know there's going to be remnants of it there, but I do want to break it up so that I can clean it off a little. It'll come out in bits and pieces, fits and starts, you might say. It came out fairly clean. So when we excavate a slot to install a new nut, some of the wood goes with it. Simple as that. That's looking pretty good, though. That's looking pretty good. Super clean, really nice. Pretty happy with that. So some of these jobs, especially trying to reconstitute a job that was not done properly to begin with, that's ugly, because sometimes people are experimenting or not as diligent or careful as they could be, and you wind up having to clean up a mess. Now, as I look at that square on this way, I want to see a perfectly square slot. If you get too aggressive with your tools in some fashion, you can get a slot that does this. It actually torques over a little bit, twists. So you got to watch for that sort of thing. You want to see a flat right across that face. Let me grab another Another little file that I like to use because it's got a certain kind of bite to it that I like to utilize. Just a square file. It's a small square file, single cut. And of course, there's tools and stuff that will do this job. All that. But I like doing it by hand. Simple as that. Now, how are we doing for glue? See, you think you might have it all taken out, but unless what you're carving is coming off, see, now it's coming off, starting to get bits of wood, okay, which is great. It's not going to be enough to cause any issues, but it means that the glue has been taken care of so that we're meeting the wood face properly. Super duper. Okay, back to my triangular file to tighten up that knee, the corner. Almost. See a tiny little bit of a distortion on the bottom here. Oh, that's dandy. That's just dandy. And since we have the original nut, of course it's going to be sloppy as, it's like, woo, okay. But I can use it to make sure that the replacement nut will not have any gaps on the bottom and looks clean, which it does. Alrighty, next job is milling this bone blank down to what we need. I would speculate that most techs would agree that an off-the-shelf nut is not going to be the best fit. Usually, and the way I put it is like this. 9 out of 10 times I have to make a nut, if not more, maybe 95% of the time. And reason is because the specs are all over the place. Replacement nuts can be hit and miss and blah, 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 blah. When you have the tools and, processes and skills to do it, it's not a big deal to make a nut. But for somebody that's just starting, there's a lot of variables. But if you take your time and watch a reasonably well done, tutorial, you get what you need to make it work, okay? So all I did was I just made a line for my overall length. Okay, and I'll chop that off. And this is 1/4 inch, I believe. And I will also thin it out to the dimensions to fit the slot, and then we'll look at our next step. One thing I neglected to mention was I still had to take the glue out of the bottom of the slot itself, and that was simply a matter of using the files again to and removing material until the stuff coming off was not the same color as the white glue or solidified glue that was coming out. Anyway, so this is all trued up. It's good to go. I got the blank at the right width. It should not wiggle at all. It should creak if you try to pop it in there. If it's too tight, then you risk, pulling something up. It's a very, very fine balance, you might say. But I still have to true up the sides here. I'll get to that in a moment. But what I'm going to do is marking off the actual face. See this? That line there is the fretboard line. I don't use a tool that's from the top of the frets. I just don't like doing it that way. I will do it this way, and I will simply eyeball it and knock off these corners a bit, okay? And like I said, you do it 1,000 times you kind of get a feel for what's going on. Plus I have the original for, you know, for posterity, and I can work with that as well. But my next critical adjustment is going to be fitting the sides so that there's a smooth transition. I don't want any catching, any hangover. Now this is not a truly squared up edge because I just left it rough for extra material. But what typically happens is when you replace a nut, the end is not truly square like this. That is this part here. What winds up happening, what you usually wind up having to accommodate, is a slight curve because of the fabrication of the instrument and the polishing and all that kind of stuff, and putting that tiny little bit of a curve on the side makes all the difference in the world. It should feel there should be no transition from, you know, from the binding through the nut. And likewise, if you look from the top down, sometimes there's a bit of a flare because it depends on the instrument. But sometimes, you know, with Les Paul style instruments or other instruments in general, you can have a little flare action, and you need to accommodate that as well. It's just a matter of getting all these facets ground down, filed down, whatever, to make the job feel right. Still have our scribe line there, but whatever. Anyway, turned out just dandy. Always try to recreate the original profile of how the original nut cants back off the top, or the chamfered, I should say. So this replacement is the same thing, matches the original profile. You know what? Just for giggles, do a quick measurement here. Mind you, this has been sanded. The original here has been sanded down a little bit because I had to just clean it up a little bit for other purposes. And that measures, this measures 0.182. Whereas this one, our handy dandy new replacement, is 1.86. So not a whole lot, but it's enough. Next step is to recreate the notches. Now I never, again, it's one of those preferential things. I never use a fret ruler, or not a fret ruler, but a nut ruler. Always do it by eye. Always, always, always by eye. And I left myself, you know, a good bit of height there. So I have lots of meat to work with to get this new nut fashioned. So here's a question for y'all. Do you prefer a nut to be equidistant on center or equidistant in spaces? What do you think? My preference is I really don't care as long as it looks right. It's got to function properly and it has to look right. I think you're really splitting hairs if you try to argue that point too much. So at this point here, I am just giving myself a notch to let the strings sit in. Okay, that's that. To make a nut from scratch with no, say, bearings to go by, still totally doable, of course, but it's a little bit different process. You want to use some logic. You want to accommodate the guitar. You want to accommodate the player, of course. Beauty. How much height do we have here? Lots. Okay. This is the beauty of leaving yourself a little bit of working room. Okay, a little bit of extra height so that you can walk stuff around if need be. Yeah, that's got to be a little bit further in. See, that's quite the angle, and I still got a little bit of room on that, so that's good. That's looking good, looking good. Okay, and the low E's got to come in a little bit. What I'm more concerned about right now is simply getting the strings equidistant so that they look right. We also have to take care that, you know, when a string transitions from one angle, typical on Gibson and Martin style headstocks, the string, the G and the D string are friends for tuning. They flare. You literally get a little bit of a bend as they transition from the nut to the straight of the string itself. You want to take that into consideration when you're cutting. Well, I'm going to use a different file for that. Once the strings are set, it's really just a matter of plowing totally vertically down. As long as they have purchase on the top, you can carve it down, and they shouldn't wander off their original spacing. That's a beautiful thing. At this point, I have the strings are down a semitone. I'll explain why. Could be a tone that's more or less, it'll do the same job. I'll get there in a second. The strings are at a reasonable height at the bridge. They're not too high, not too low. Everything's in the ballpark. But what I need to do, which is just out of camera range here, you might be able to see it here, is I want to make sure that I have the neck as not over straight, but straight. Why? Well, between the lesser tension from being tuned down, what will happen is I'll have insurance here. So the idea is I want to get the strings pretty much where they need to be, but by the time I put on a fresh set of strings and I get it up to actual pitch, pressure on the neck, compression, all that stuff, and adjust the truss rod, I want to make sure that I haven't let the horse out of the barn. The last thing I want to do is repair a brand new nut. You know, that's kind of sucky. So it's just insurance, being conservative, and making allowances for things that do happen. So at this point, like I said, I'm just going to cut straight down. Everything is already cut for width, although I think I will tweak that first string over just a hair. It's still bothering me a little bit. Yeah, it's good. There we go. Now, actually, that worked out just perfect. Because now I will chop that bad boy down. And it is remarkable how one stroke can destroy everything. All your nice work on a particular slot. And how I'm reading this, now I've done this before, and I'll explain it again. I use light to give me an idea of the depth I need to get to for individual strings. I don't use the same measurement for every string. It depends on the strings, depends on a few other factors. How you cut. Some softer materials like tusk, for example, can cut, I mean, one stroke on a tusk nut or would be, I mean, we'll put it this way, I'd have to probably do 2 strokes on a tusk on a bone nut to get 1 out of a tusk nut. It's the hardness of the material that I'm trying to explain there. Okay, here's my 40, and I like to give a little bit of a wiggle, and I also try to go in the direction of the post. That makes a big difference. Lots of room on that one yet. Okay. And this is interesting trying to work around the camera, but whatever. Okay, we're close, we're close. I'm just kind of walking the depths into where I want them. These are an old set of Hosco files that I got many, many years ago. They still work just brilliantly so many years later. Just got to make sure that you clean them once in a while. And that's right. You hear that? If you hear that clicking, that's me just cleaning the file, just knocking the garbage out of it. So I work back to front, front to back, doesn't matter. Ooh, that is right tight. The most critical stroke is going to be at the front. As you come this way, one stroke here the wrong way will ruin your day, because as soon as you overcut that leading edge, the face of the nut, it's repair time. Oh, a little more. Oh, that's great. That's beauty right there. All right, and by the way, the files I'm using are a couple thou over each individual string. Okay. If you use the exact diameter, you're setting yourself up for problems, because the string needs room to work. It's almost there, almost there. Oh boy, that's so close. Oh yeah, good. Okay, so let's see if I can induce a little. There we go. You may or may not see that. Okay, I'm just pushing up on the back of the headstop. Snap! Oh, typical Gibson Pro. Anyway, so what that's doing is I'm inducing a little bit of, a couple pounds of pressure, just to see what happens as the strings ride up a little bit, just to make sure that I do have what I need to finish up the job. And at this point, it looks just dandy. Now we have the blank, which is non-blank. It's been cut. And at this point, I'm just going to clean up the top, get rid of some tooling marks. I'm going to leave it somewhat au naturel. I'll get it, nice, but not super high polish. I think that's just overdone, Anyway, we'll clean it up and then we'll get it fixed. I'll actually clean it up a little bit more once it's finally in, and just before I put on the new strings. But at this point, it's a matter of putting on a little bit of glue. I always find that getting it on the face of the nut, and a very, very thin layer, by the way, is all you need. A little bit on the bottom and a little bit on the face. You saw that was like super, super small amount. I gotta get that centered before it sets, because it'll set up pretty quick. It says 15 minutes working time, but depending on the porousness of the materials you're working with, you can just feel it just right there. And one knock with a file will take care of that, no problem. My auger file will, maybe I'll just give it a, there we go. Get that. Beauty. Perfect. Okay. Really, it's all it takes. And I want to get some pressure on this nut. Okay, where did we wind up? As you can see, it can be a fairly involved process. So we'll get it get the instrument up to pitch. And well, I'll be an uncle's munkle. That looks just dandy. Actually, I might have to just tweak those cuts just a hair. So, on the subject of that, nut slot depth. The way it works, in my mind and experience. Now, granted, I have the advantage of 3D vision here, in that, you know, I can move around and see things much differently than the camera, which is an absolute. In terms of how deep the nut slots go, I leave the low E a little proud. The A can go a fractional bit lower. The D should be a little about the same as the E string. The G needs room. The G needs air. That's got to be a little bit higher than say some of the other strings, particularly the G and the D, because they're thin strings that get really excited. They need room. The B can go down a hair more, and the E can go really quite tight to the fret. Now, if you look, I mean, it's hard to describe this, but, and there are, you know, there's a lot of different ways of measuring this. You know, people want to, well, you just want to clear this using this method and stuff like that. I just, it really depends on a lot of things, and one of them is the instrument, the type of relief, the amount of relief. There's really a lot of variables. Like, this neck is still fairly straight, but I want to see if I can get away with it in its current state, with the neck really straight. It's been refretted. I just finished the refret. And I always try to shoot for a dead straight neck if I can get it, or with very, very, very little relief. Like 4/1000 is wonderful in my books. But it depends, again, on the instrument. But anyway, this is more or less done. Well, here's our fabulous bone nut job, all complete. And it turned out just fine. Yeah, I sucked it up and I actually put a little bit of a polish on it. I thought, you know what, it's gonna look just nicey nice. Okay. The Gibson factory nuts are typically not highly polished like that. And which, kind of doesn't sit well with me because I like to keep things as factory as possible, but it is what it is. It looks nice. String spacing is good. It's all good, Anyway, that's all she wrote. Turned out just dandy. As always, play loud, have fun, have a great day. Like and subscribe. Read the description below. Cool resources down there. And again, have a great day. Cheers. See ya.